Dr. Christine Ladish is a pediatric neuropsychologist at Mary Bridge Children's Hospital and Health Network, part of the multi-care health system. With decades of experience, she supports children with neurodevelopmental and emotional differences and helps families understand how brain development, regulation, and emotional intelligence shape everyday behavior. Dr. Barbara Munoz is a learning specialist and academic advisor at Beacon College, where she supports neurodivergent college students with learning and attention differences. With over 20 years spanning K through 12 in higher education, she specializes in executive functioning, self-regulation, and helping families bridge school expectations with emotional growth. Dr. Chinwe Williams is a licensed professional counselor and the founder of Meaningful Solutions Counseling and Consulting. A nationally recognized speaker and trauma specialist, she helps children and families build emotional intelligence through nervous system regulation, connection-based parenting, and strategies that help neurodivergent kids feel safe, seen, and supported. Now we're going to begin our conversation with Dr. Ladish. From a brain development standpoint, what should families understand about how emotional intelligence develops in neurodivergent children and why it may not follow typical timelines?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to speak about this topic. I would say that there's a 4 times greater likelihood for children who have neurodiversity to struggle with emotional regulation and emotional issues. We do know that aspects of the brain may process information that's coming in differently. And emotional intelligence is really a skill. I think often it's easy for us as parents to envision that it's coming about naturally. But for kids that are neurodiverse, there are many skills that they're trying to balance concordantly. So there's appreciating their own emotional states, understanding the states of others, and then coordinating what response they want to have in that particular situation. All of that coming together requires the ability to attend, the ability to differentiate self from others, and the ability to understand abstract concepts like emotions. All of those things, for anybody who has a child who's neurodiverse on the autism spectrum, has attention challenges, are very complex skills. The good news is that these things can be taught. We just have to appreciate that we need to make abstract concepts concrete. And children, by going about this intentionally, we can support children to develop and have good emotional intelligence.
Thank you, Doctor. So, Dr. Munoz, for families who are raising neurodivergent children, how do you explain to them what emotional intelligence is in real-life terms that they'll be able to understand and recognize in school and in the home setting?
Sure. So it's important to know the definition. Emotional intelligence is about how a child understands, manages, and responds to emotions. And there's really a wonderful framework to follow, which is to teach them how to regulate, ideally that they could teach them how to regulate the aspect of understanding their emotions, labeling the emotions, and then there's the expressing of appropriate emotions and the regulating of the emotions. And what we want to do is help the students reach those goals, reach the desired outcome of each of those topics in the framework.
Thank you, Doctor. So, Dr. Williams, why is the concept of emotional safety such a critical function for children who already feel misunderstood or overwhelmed?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me for this discussion, Daryl. So, emotional safety, as I explained to parents and educators, is really the foundation for emotional intelligence, because a child can't learn to understand, identify, nor manage their emotions if they're not feeling protected while having those emotions. So for neurodivergent kids, this is tough for them. They're navigating through a world that doesn't fully understand how they learn, how they socialize. They're constantly corrected according to studies, looking at kids who have attention difficulties. By age 10, these kids are corrected up to 20,000 more times, right? So just sort of imagine yourself as that child. The correction, the criticism, typically very well intended, creates a negativity brain bias, which we all inherently have, but these kids start to expect failure. So our kids are working overtime. What do we need to do? Well, what's really powerful is for us as caregivers to settle their nervous systems. When they feel safe, powerful things happen, right? Their nervous system that's experiencing heightened sensations, awareness, sensory input is fast. And so that's really what causes emotional escalation. So what we need to do is to lower all of that input, create a container of safety, and that helps them to finally relax. And when they're more relaxed, the benefits are this: they're able to communicate more, even kids who don't typically have a lot of communication. I've seen it myself, even as a parent. They're able to problem solve and they're able to take on new tasks.
Dr. Laddish, how can parents tell the difference between a child who's being defiant and a child whose nervous system is simply being overwhelmed?
That's such an important question. I think what I would want individuals to understand is that behavior, when it's happening, is happening for a reason. It's a form of communication. And while we may not understand that reason, there's always communication happening in the background. And so that's key number one. The difference between tantruming versus having a meltdown is really what's going on within the child and the level of control that the child has within the circumstance. So a child who may be appearing to have a tantrum or more willful behavior that is within their control, you can see the symptoms. The child who will do something and then kind of check in and look, did you get my message there? Who may be making statements that allows us to know that they're trying to communicate. Their communication itself may be a cue, but you sort of see the waxing and the waning of the child in control with those behaviors. A child who is having a meltdown is literally being hijacked by their emotions. The emotions have come into the front seat. The child is sort of in the back seat of the car, if you will, and they're just being taken for a ride by their emotions. And the communication there really is, I'm completely overwhelmed and distressed. Either the sensory input or the social demands are far beyond the child's experience, and they're no longer able to respond meaningfully. The important part of that distinction, or making that distinction, is how parents respond. We cannot respond to emotional dysregulation and complete loss of ability the same way we might to a tantrum. So in the case of a tantrum, there may be more opportunity to work with the child and mitigate their behavior or what's going on. When a child is having meltdown, it's really upon us and removing stimulation or removing the child from the stimulation and allowing appropriate time for that child to calm down.
All right. Dr. Munoz, how can parents help support emotional regulation while encouraging persistence and independence when frustration shows up in schoolwork or focus in their children?
So the key word is, ideally, we want the parent to be self-regulated. And what happens oftentimes is that the parent already may have had a long day at work or at home, dealing with other issues. They come home, they're exhausted, they're tired, they have to do a lot of chores, and then they're going to help their child with schoolwork. So that, or other issues that can cause them to also become dysregulated. So ideally, we want the parent to be as regulated as possible. And then we need to remember, we want to support the child first, and then as we're skill building. So first, we want to teach them regulation. So not necessarily correction, but regulation and regulating the work that they're doing. Then we want to co-regulate, right? We want to co-regulate with them. Then we start to slowly give them guided independence. So we're showing them how to regulate. Now you can do it on your own. It's not about doing the work for them. It's about showing them and modeling how to do it, and then how to be successful at managing those emotions. Then we want to normalize the effort, let them know that they are doing well at this skill. They're understanding, they're being good listeners. It's not about necessarily complimenting, but just giving them those little boosts to let them know that they're putting in effort. Then we want to teach regulation as maybe a summarizing activity of, look how well we've done. If we've managed to focus a little bit, we've gotten some work done, and now that's a good step to teach the regulation. And then ultimately comes the praise. And as I said, not you're so smart, but I really love the way that you were able to focus and concentrate on this assignment and put in a lot of effort. And even that empathy, I know you've had a long day. I know this was a lot of work, and we were able to get through it together. And also, one more thing I want to add is, a lot of times as parents, we want to get it all done as fast as possible because we're all so busy. But it's also a great idea to have them start their homework, maybe take a little break, like a shower, eat dinner, and then go back to finishing their work.
So, Dr. Williams, in emotional moments when words don't work, what are some body-based regulation strategies that parents can use right away to help calm the situation?
I love this question. So I am a somatic therapist, and soma is the root word for somatic. It just means body. And this involves using the body to maintain connection, emotional connection, but also to reduce anxiety and distress, so to regulate. So when a child is overwhelmed, their body is reading your body as the caregiver, the teacher, the parent, before your words. So in my work, I offer two main strategies for parents and educators, and it's breath and movement. So we've sort of heard this already before. So slowing down the breath is really one of the most effective ways to settle the nervous system. So I find it to be a quick doorway back to regulation. So as the caregiver, just slowing your own exhale. So that's the co-regulation that we've been talking about. Softening your shoulders, even softening your jaw is what I teach my clients. Allowing your child to feel your calm. So that's where it begins. Placing your hand on your chest and your belly, and then inviting the child to do the same. It's actually called parent-child breath. And so something else that I love, I use with my clients, I use with my own kiddos. I have a child who is autistic, a child who is neurotypical. This works for both. Movement. So movement, rhythmic movement, heavy work, swaying, rocking, gently bouncing on a medicine ball, strong but slow marching. That gives the nervous system a predictable pattern to settle into.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Laddish, what are some adult responses that may be well-intentioned that might actually interfere with emotional intelligence development in neurodivergent children?
It's another great question. Parents rather love their children so intensely, but I think it's easy for us to fall prey to some of these things. I certainly have myself. One issue can be forcing or trying to force a behavior that is beyond the child's level of ability. And it can be something as simple as speaking to a child and demanding eye contact or attention during a time that's very difficult for the child. So children with autism, for example, may look away to try to narrow the stimulus field of the amount of information coming in. And that may actually be adaptive for them. They may look away so they can focus on what you're saying rather than all the visual stimuli. So we want to be careful not to force behavior. Another is making demands that are very abstract where the child may not understand what we're asking for. So something like calm down. That may be obvious to us what we're expecting, but are you asking me to calm my body, lower my voice, calm something else in the environment? We really want to be more specific about what we're asking for in the child and give them as much information as we can to help them succeed. Punishment. Punishing meltdowns in particular, as I mentioned earlier, meltdowns are not within the child's control. And so we want to be thoughtful about how we utilize. Parents may default to punishment when they're very frustrated or emotionally dysregulated. And we need to be mindful. Punishment rarely works without the appropriate contingencies in a short amount of time. We don't want to shame a child for their behavior or restrict their access to what calms them and helps them have higher emotional intelligence and regulation. An example is my child, when he was younger, he has autism, was a pacer. It used to drive me crazy and I could hear the floorboards squeaking, but that was his way of regulating. And I needed to change myself and my expectations to understand that that was adaptive for him. Finally, I think the biggest thing we can do is speak to the child about what we want them to do, not what we want them to stop doing. If we continue to say, don't do, without an alternative behavior, that child's going to revert back to the behavior that is problematic because we're not giving them an alternative. So alternative adaptive behaviors are key.
All right, thank you. Dr. Munoz, across K through 12 and college, how can families talk about growth areas without making the child feel behind, broken, or less than?
So the most important thing is that we not judge. Do not judge. When you're going to speak to the child, it should be in a loving manner where the child does not feel judged. The second thing that I feel passionate about is do not criticize. Do not criticize your child when you're trying to help them get better skills. It's not something that they're going to understand. It's going to make them feel less than. It's just not a productive way of helping them. And most importantly, do not compare. What happens a lot of times is families tend to compare one sibling to another, and that is very detrimental to that child. They already know they're different. They feel different. They might see their siblings succeeding at different levels than they are, and they don't think that they can gain that same level. So please do not compare. And then most importantly, we have to model self-compassion, even that they see we're modeling it within ourselves. One word I really always hate is the word lazy. I just hate that word lazy. And that's a word that I often see used. So it's just important to use positive language, get rid of the negative language, and focusing on the good skills that the student is or their child is exhibiting and showing and capable of.
All right, great. So Dr. Williams, co-regulation is essential but exhausting. So I'm wondering what sustainable co-regulation looks like for parents who themselves feel stretched thin.
Yes, when I'm conducting parenting workshops or trainings, at the very end, after I've offered interventions and techniques and strategies and data, I say, now what happens when your own resilience hits the wall, right? As you're saying, when you're stretched thin as a parent or a caregiver. Some of your viewers, I'm sure that my fellow panelists are very familiar with this book called Good Enough Parenting that came out some years ago. And so this is really based on a concept that supports the idea that being flawed, yet loving, yet present, yet available as a parent is not just okay, it's actually beneficial for child development. It's beneficial for raising more well-rounded children. So this is what I tease when I'm talking to parents. This is what I call the Goldilocks of parenting, right? So this is what the type of parent that Goldilocks would pick, right? Because she tried 3 different porridges. And so this is about 3 different parenting paths. And so many of us, especially because the world feels so hectic and just the pace is just, pretty ridiculous. Let's just be frank. Parenting is stressful. This idea of being a good enough parent, I find to be very reassuring for myself as a parent, and it's very helpful for other parents. So the big idea is, yes, co-regulation is exhausting. You do not have to do this perfectly. In fact, you won't. So striving for perfection as a parent creates this unrealistic standard that inevitably your child will start to absorb, and it's going to make you feel like a failure. So sustainable co-regulation starts with remembering that you just have to be available enough, present enough, not perfect.
Dr. Laddish, how do executive functioning challenges like inattention or impulsivity impact how peers understand the relationship with their peers who are neurodivergent?
Executive functioning has a lot to do with social interaction and coordinating our activity and even simple social interactions. So first, it's important to understand sort of what executive functioning really is. It controls one's ability to plan, to organize, and importantly, to engage in what's called divided attention, or being able to know what to attend to at certain points in time. If you think about the concept of a divided attention and the amount of information that's coming forth in a social interaction with friends, right? There's what's happening in the situation, the context. There's what the child is saying. There's what the child is doing. There's what other kids are doing. If you're impulsive and or inattentive, it's really hard, right? Those skills are already not your strength. And so it's important for us to understand that children may struggle in social situations to know not only what to attend to, but how to attend. If you're impulsive, they may jump in, blurt out answers, putting them at risk of looking like there are miscommunications. If they're inattentive, and really, even with the amount of information coming into them, they may easily miss social cues. They may also be prone to pay attention to something that's very obvious or salient, but maybe not the most relevant information that's coming from the interaction. So perhaps a child takes another child's ball. Maybe I take your ball because it's my turn, but to that individual who's neurodiverse, if I'm just focused on the fact that you took my ball and I'm not paying attention to the social rules or the set shifting between my turn and your turn, then I'm more apt to misunderstand that social situation. So, I think it's important for parents to understand kids want to engage desperately with having friends. They may not always be able to take in all the information. And there are 4 things, I think of it as the 4 S's, that parents and educators can engage in with children to help make them set up for success. One is to provide structure in a situation so that they know the rules, they know what is expected of them, and they can engage in mastery. The second is to offer social scripts as a means of starting into a situation to kind of enter that space in a way that feels more comfortable and in their control. If things get uncomfortable or the child is feeling awkward or unsure how to respond, to teach them how to take space, take a breath, step away, have an opportunity to catch themselves. And then finally, offering solutions, helping them come up with solutions to re-enter a social situation.
So, Dr. Munoz, what emotional intelligence skills best equip neurodivergent kids to self-advocate with teachers and to navigate school expectations?
So ideally, they really need to be just have a lot of emotional regulation. They need to regulate themselves before they approach these teachers or their peers, because a lot of times what happens is when they're going to talk to them, they're already angry, they're frustrated, something may have happened earlier that has them upset. So it's important that they're regulated so that they will be heard and understood. Being self-aware at that moment, maybe taking the time and realizing right now is not a good time for me to try to advocate. And that's the next one. It's not the right time to advocate for myself. Maybe I got to wait a little bit. I should wait a little bit until I'm more relaxed. So making sure that the child is able to advocate for themselves is very important for their needs and wants, and making sure that their needs and wants are something that's attainable. Having the confidence, being able to build confidence is very important for our students and our children. And most importantly, to just persevere. The ability to persevere, even though things get difficult, is also very hard. And asking for help, just make sure that ultimately we want it to be ideal, but ask for help. At any moment, we need to make sure that the child learns to ask for help and advocate for themselves when they have a need and a want.
All right, thank you. So, Dr. Williams, transitions can be especially hard for neurodivergent children. So how can parents prepare them emotionally without unintentionally stoking anxiety?
Yeah, so I like the idea of previewing the change. We know that change and transition can actually be quite difficult for all of us, neurotypical adults and kids, but for our neurodiverse kiddos even more so. So how do we preview, let them know what's happening or what's going to happen without overloading them? So the idea here is to give them a heads up, but without a whole lot of information that would maybe, elicit worry, right? Then more questions and they need more reassurance. So instead of giving long explanations and repeatedly sort of saying, okay, this is what's coming up, this is what's coming up, offer something very simple, very concrete. So, for example, a big challenge that parents often mention in the therapy room is transitioning from a desirable activity to a less desirable activity. So let's say your child is playing a game on the computer or a video game and they're enjoying it, but you know what? It's time to go to bed. It's time to transition to bed. Moving from a desirable activity to something that it's like not so fun, right? Could be difficult. So something a parent can say is, in 5 minutes, we're going to shut the computer down. You're going to go upstairs, brush your teeth, and get ready for bed. And here's the part that I like to add. I can go with you. So that's the connection piece, right? And the child is probably not going to like any of that, but you're very direct, you're very concrete, and it's not all of a sudden. And the other thing that I want to mention is just anchoring whatever change and transition with something that's familiar. So kids handle transition better when there's some sort of sameness thread to hold on to. So for example, it could be bringing a comforting item I've got stuff all around me here, sensory stones, a lovey, a teddy bear, a bracelet, something that can help them remember that even though things are changing, there's something familiar within this change that tends to lower anxiety. And I really love the mention of social stories. Just a quick anecdote. My autistic son, his teacher was having his first child, going out on maternity leave. My child was anxious about it. The school created a social story, which I thought was wonderful. And the social story just pretty much had pictures and very short sentences about what's going to happen, who's going to be the substitute, when Mr. So-and-so is going to come back. And that helped him to settle so much. So you see the change. This is from the child's perspective without talking about it so much. And that helps to drop the anxiety.
All right, well, thanks for the story and for the answer, and that will have to be our last word for our discussion. Dr. Christine Laddish, Dr. Barbara Munoz, and Dr. Chinwe Williams. Thanks for the knowledge.